Well, if a recent visit from Tony Blair wasn't bad enough, the most populous nation in Africa has other worries too. This week, the mother of Nigeria's finance minister was kidnapped and there were reports of millions being looted from its treasury yet again. Joining me to talk about the recent spate of killings in oil-rich Delta State is Alice Ukoko from Delta State in Nigeria, the founder of Women of Africa.
Thank you so very much, and it's a pleasure being here again.
Thank you very much to you for coming back on. I notice the great Tony Blair has been in your country, Nigeria, trying to reconcile Christians and Muslims, I think the news report said. What do you think of that visit?
Well, I don't know. I think there is all of this is about the hypocrisy that Africa is continuously being bombarded with, because I think to reconcile Muslim and Christians, who does Tony Blair have in mind? Who are you going to invite to the discussion table? Because I do not believe that Nigeria has religious problem. I think and in fact, it's not an ethnicity problem. That's not what we have. What we have is issue of corruption. What we have is the issue of the absence of governance. A group of people that take care of employment, take care of education, take care of health, take care of everything, the aspirations of citizens.
But you may, your groups like yourself, may be going for stopping that corruption. I was thinking, Blair, your previous premier, stopped diplomatic relations with France in the 60s over atomic tests. How is it that the new governments of Nigeria in recent years seem to kowtow even more to imperial powers, as it were?
The point is, that's the point I make. I mean, Nigeria has
getting worse.
Well, Nigeria has reached the point that we no longer have politicians of ideology. We no longer have politicians who even think that yesterday mattered. We now have politicians who have imposed themselves on the people, and these are driven mainly by the oil wealth. Because even the time of Blair, who is the first prime minister of Nigeria, there was no oil, if you like. So now, what is actually happening is that the oil wealth is now driving a class of people that see the oil as their personal achievement for themselves. And obviously, the position, how much you get out of what becomes a national cake, which in fact is not a national cake if you look at it. Because no country depends on a particular resource for driving everything. Because what they're doing is that they get the oil. The oil money is the one that everybody share amongst the clique of them, and leave the generation of the generality of the people to go without.
The multinational oil company Shell would say they're trying to do their best to stop that kind of corruption.
Well, Shell will tell you that they are not government. And I've held talks with Shell many times. But the truth is, Shell is the biggest problem. Not just Shell, we have Chevron as well. We have other oil multinational as well. But of course, you find that in a country like Nigeria, where corruption is the driving vehicle, then obviously the people that are making this oil, turning the oil into the resource that these individuals steal and take into foreign banks, become their partners in arms. And so, of course, Shell is the one that is bringing the entire, driving the wheel of the resources that is available to them. And Shell will tell you it has nothing, because I've met with Shell many times. I've been to them in Nigeria. I've met with them one-on-one, and I have seen that Shell is not prepared, to even look at the areas where they are operating.
Well, how are things in your particular state, Uzere?
Well, we find that Uzere,
in Niger Delta State.
In the Niger Delta, because obviously the whole wealth and the whole problem of Nigeria stems from the Niger Delta, if you like. Because the Niger Delta is the oil-producing area, and the oil is the one that is actually fueling and driving the wheel of corruption, the wheel of inhumane behavior, the evil of individual against individual. That is what we are getting. Some will say, well, imperialism, we said it. How come that we're now driving? Tony Blair is now in Nigeria trying to make peace. Tony Blair was supposed to also be in the Middle East to make peace between Israel and the Palestine, but he hasn't done it. He's shifted to Nigeria, and he goes to Nigeria because he was also there before with George Bush. The interest is oil, and who drives that oil?
But then what is it about Nigeria? I was saying Yar'Adua said that his time when he met George W. Bush was the greatest moment of his life. What is up with your politicians?
Well, we don't have politicians. That's the point. We don't have politicians. Politicians are those who have the ideas of political science and know how to to drive and juggle.
But they're hugely backed by the United States.
Well, I mean,
Susan Rice is a great friend of your Nigerian government's MPs.
What has happened? It's reached a point now that I say to myself, for how long will I continue to blame the outside world for what is actually happening on the ground? I think the time is now that we push for a new world order where we maybe not forget what happened in the past, but we have to come to a point where we draw the line.
You're saying it's the Nigerians' fault?
Yes, we do, but that's what I'm saying, because if you turn to DFID, because I talk to DFID too, and they tell me, no, you see...
The British Department for International Development.
Yes, and they say, well, we talk to the government. And I say, but who is the government you talk with? You're talking with government in Africa. For over 50 years, you feed money into Africa to make the way for you to come in and take resources. Africans should know that it is their responsibility to protect the interests of Africa.
But how can you, with that amount of millions and trillions of dollars ranged against the African people, as some would have it?
But
I mean, look at Uzeri, your own state.
Uzeri, yes.
It's worse now than when you came on last time.
That is very correct. I think we now have people, we are now running, the king of Uzeri, Tuwede III, is now in exile. And again, we know that if, in fact, in Jesse, this is Delta State, because Delta State has become, like, as I always say, Delta State is a mini Nigeria.
But you can't blame the Nigerians of Uzeri for what's been going on there,
I blame the governor and the deputy governor of Delta State. Because always, if you go on the ground, you will find individuals that are being used as the local lords that they are using to destroy their own land. So for me, I see Odwara, who is the governor of Delta State, and his deputy, who is supposed to be a professor of law, Amos Otwama, who's really are turning the place upside down. We now have, when you look back and you ask about Delta State, where Uzeri is sitting, you will find that Delta State is the most insecure state in the entire world, in the entire country. Delta State is also the most deprived of the entire country. You will also find also that poverty bites deeper in Delta State than anywhere else. The Delta State governor called me a few weeks ago, and we talked about the Uzeri problem. And I said to him, you've got our youths, 20 youths at the time, imprisoned. What did they do? Because they protested. What is happening is America is very much, in fact, I sent a message to the White House recently on the issue of Uzeri to Obama, that we need to put the order of things back on the agenda. In fact, it was during the time of the campaign, that we cannot continue to be pushing across and causing so much trouble and pain on the other end. We saw in Egypt when for many years, for 30 years, Mubarak was sustained in power to say, keep the terrorists out. We cannot stay above in your country and come across and say you are trying to make things better.
That's good. Thank you very much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.